I'm going through my Bible and I'm looking for people that maybe you haven't heard of, and come across this part of the Bible that I'm utterly fascinated by. It's found in Genesis, first 6 chapters. It's before the flood, before Noah and all that. And there's this time period. It's passages of scripture that you read and you end up with more questions than answers. Talks about the creation, talks about the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, talks about the first sin, the serpent, the garden. And the questions start, was it a real snake or did he just act like a snake? Their children, Cain and Abel. Questions around that relationship. Cain ends up killing Abel out of envy. Conversation God has with Cain. Sin is crouching at the door. You must master it. The birth of their third son, Seth, one who's just like Adam. And then it follows this line of people down until we reach Noah over those first few chapters. Chapter 6, first few verses, you could write volumes and all the speculation of what that means. The person I want to talk about is found in chapter 5. His name is Enoch. I read the passage. It follows a pattern that you can find all the way through chapter 5 and then breaks that pattern with Enoch and then continues on with the pattern again. Start verse 17, chapter 5. Altogether, Mahalalel lived a total of 895 years and then he died. More questions. How could people live that long? Verse 18, when Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. And after he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Jared lived a total of 962 years. Then he died. And then verse 21, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked faithfully with God for over 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived a total of 365 years. Enoch walked faithfully with God. Then he was no more because God took him away. Again, the questions. What did it mean to walk faithfully with God? And how did God take this guy? Did he just snatch him one day? Did anybody see this happen? Did he float up in the sky or just disappear? Like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings? What does it even mean to walk with God? I mean, we're talking about an era of time before all the things that we have. There was no Bible, no temple, there was no Jewish race. There was none of the aids or helps we have. To give you an idea how ancient this world was, I took a course a couple of years ago on ancient Mesopotamia. Ancient Mesopotamia is that era that we know very little about, but we have so many questions. And it's that early biblical time passage. It's pre-Abraham. That's how old Mesopotamia is. We're talking about cultures that were around for thousands of years before ancient Egypt even started to thrive, before the pyramids were built. One of the early peoples, probably the earliest, the Sumerians. There's some debate around that, but I think they were. Sumerians were descended from people, they say, that survived a great flood on an ark, a boat. And to give you an idea, ancient Sumeria the came to an end 200 years before the last of the mammoths died on the steppe in Russia. That's how old this culture was. We think 2000 BC, back to the time of Abraham, we think that's ancient history, but what happens when you go back another 4,000 years? And before that flood, there was this period of time. We don't know a lot about it, but we know there was a man named Enoch. We know that without the help of many things, he chose to walk with God, and for whatever reason, God took him. We don't know what that means particularly. Did he get transformed right away? What happened? He must have. You don't live long in space unless you're something different. But a couple things jump out at me. One is the end of chapter 4. Chapter 4, and this is easy to overlook, but it says at that time people began to call on the name of the Lord. Genesis 4 at the end, last verse. People began to pray. They hadn't prayed before. I kind of get the sense Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, they talked directly to God, but it wasn't seen as prayer. It seems this time, thousands of years before the flood, thousands of years before thousands of years of ancient history, people learn that when you ask God for something, when you call on the name of the Lord, something happens. It doesn't happen when you don't. We call it prayer. We kind of take it for granted. We think prayer's always been around, but truth of the matter is this is when prayers began. People learned that if you called on God, something happened, generally to your benefit, that didn't happen when you didn't. So it's into this context. A couple of thousand years later, a guy named Enoch comes along. But Enoch doesn't just call on the name of the Lord. Enoch walks with God. What does that even mean? Well, if we're going to get benefit, I guess we need to look. And thankfully, in the Bible, in the book of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews, I think Apollos, some people think Paul, writes this. Hebrews 11, verse 5. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. Before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. The writer of Hebrews looks at the life of Enoch and determines the reason Enoch was able to walk with God, what provided the jet fuel, the motivation, the inspiration was faith. What is faith? Well, in this case, he defines it. First of all, faith is God's love language. It is. You can see this in the Gospels. What made Jesus stop? What made him excited? What made Jesus stop and take notice? Every time it's faith. When Jesus encounters someone who believes, even though they may not have a logical reason to believe, it lightens him up. It brings him alive. Faith is God's love language. Faith is when we trust God. What is faith? In this case, it says we believe he exists and rewards those who earnestly seek him. Faith is a pursuit by an imperfect person of a perfect and holy God. It's a belief. It's a trust. Took another course. In the course, I talked to another student. We were kind of having an online discussion about things. She was from England. You know how familiar you are with the belief systems in England, but a lot of intellectuals are what they call empiricists in England. There's kind of the split in 1500s, 1600s between the empiricists and the rationalists, and later the romanticists. And the empiricists basically believe this: if I can sense it with my five senses, then it's real. If I can't, it's not real. Summation. The rationalists in Europe say, if you want to prove something, prove it. The empiricists take it one step further. They say, prove it to me. The romantics say, how does it feel? But as we're having this discussion, and she said she couldn't believe in Christianity because it required faith. And I asked her a question. I said, do you ever get on an elevator? Well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, I asked, do you first go up into the machinery of the elevator and take it all apart and make sure it's working? Do you check all the joints and all the wires and all the machinery and all those kind of things before you get on and press a button to go up or down? I said, no. I said, well, that's faith. She says, no, they're reliable. They're generally reliable. I said, yeah, but there's always a chance something could break. People die in elevator accidents every year, but somehow you still use it. Why is that? Well, I mean, the odds are rare or whatever, but yeah, but you got to have faith. No matter how little, you have to have faith whenever you get on an elevator. You got to remember, you're getting into a steel box accelerating, up hundreds of feet in seconds. That takes a lot of faith. You ever get on a plane? We all hear about plane crash. Get in your car. Do you drive anywhere? Faith is part of life. The empirics like to think that it isn't, but it is. She said, well, you can't prove Christianity in the empirical sense. I said, well, you could do an experiment. You could take 20 people, 20 that love God and choose to follow him, Christ followers, and people that don't. You could test them over 20 years and see who at the end of the 20 years is most healthy psychologically, all those kind of things. And then her mask dropped. I would never do that experiment, she said, because I know it wouldn't work. It's amazing how the scientific become very unscientific when confronted with facts. I want to be like Enoch, and I want to teach you how to be like Enoch. It's simple, but difficult. Enoch walked by faith. We got so many things to help us out. We got our Bibles, our church services, our small groups. We got all those kind of things. And they're good. They're really good. And they're biblical. But way back at the beginning of time, when none of those things existed yet, a man named Enoch walked with God. He chose to believe God exists, even though he couldn't see him. Probably hear him, taste him, feel him, whatever. He believed God existed. And not only that, he believed that seeking him brought a reward. It was the completion of who he was. It was something worthwhile. It was precious. It was something worth abandoning so much else over. That's faith. By faith, I choose to pray when I choose to just do something for myself. By faith, I choose to serve when a lot of times the inner me wants attention and wants glory. By faith, I give. By faith, I give my time. By faith, I go to church. I'm paid to be there, I know, but you aren't. By faith, I believe God exists. Not only that, I believe by seeking him and following him, that he in turn will take care of me. That's what faith is. I can't explain a lot in the world that Enoch lived. Can't explain why people lived hundreds of years. I can't explain all those kind of things. There's all kinds of theories. I've heard them all and they're wonderful. And sometime maybe we can get into it. But I do know this part, this is for you. This person is remembered by the writer of Hebrews. Why? Because he did something that was timeless. And I invite you to do the same. Thanks for listening.